Okay, we're honored. So we're going to start with a chant now that you're here. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvina Vaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Okay, and a little prayer to technology too. Hopefully it'll survive. So we're going to do something a little different today, different than we usually do. We're not spotlighted, are we? No, now we are. Yeah.
Let me do that.
Yeah. So we're going to do something a little bit different than we usually do. We're going to be talking about how to teach. I mean, usually we're in the tutorials and stuff, we're going over assists, but really we're talking about the alignment of postures. So we do it by doing assisting, but it's not really a tutorial on assisting, it's a tutorial on alignment. But now we want to give a tutorial on teaching sun salutations. And we're Ashtanga practitioners. So the sun salutations we do are very specific to that tradition, and that's obviously what we're going to be talking about. But just to note, to recognize that sun salutations are in many different traditions, schools of yoga, and that there'll be different, we call it conditions, different rules for all of those different sun salutations. But and they're all right, and none of them are better or more correct than the other. I say that because I'm supposed to. Really, obviously, I think Ashtanga is the best because that's what I practice. It's important that you do have some kind of structure. Otherwise, what are you teaching, right? You have to have some kind of definitive idea in your head about what the correct line is, what the breath is, etc. Like that information has to be there in order to be able to pass it on, right?
Right. And just in relation, even if you're not a teacher, but in relation to your own mindfulness practice, we're here. We have the other camera that we're going to switch in a second too. The reason why we need this external objectivity is this is how we begin to, cultivate mindfulness. Because otherwise, if we show up on the mat and we just do whatever we feel like, and we don't kind of stick to the structure that is given by our tradition through the parampara, then we don't get to sit with all that comes up. So it's not just about, positive and good things. We also have to learn how to sit and be with difficult emotions as well. And when we have this structure, it starts to bring all of that up. And then it begins to teach us how to be with whatever it is that's coming up with kind of calmness and equanimity, right? And it takes practice and it takes time. So this is why we constantly emphasize this idea of structure, of this external objectivity, and following the tradition that you practice and study.
Structure supports focus, yeah. And I don't know how many of you guys are Ashtanga practitioners, but Ashtanga also is a broader idea. Ashtanga is one of the paths to yoga that's described in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. And in the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali defines yoga as stilling the mind, right? What happens when we still the mind? Yoga is chitta vritti nirodha. So when we're practicing, that is always what we're considering as our objective. It's easy to get distracted by the physicality of it, but we have to remember what the difference is between something like exercise and yoga, right? Or gymnastics. We would call it shitty gymnastics in yoga. So we want it's definitely physical, and ultimately we end up kind of dissolving the distinction between external and internal, but our goal is entirely internal, right? So it doesn't really matter about how deep or whether you get these postures perfect or whatever. It's all about your intention and focus. Okay, so that said, now we're going to get really picky about about the body and the lines of the body and the breath and things like that. Okay, and that's why, because it supports focus. Okay, in the Surya Namaskar, the Sun Salutation A in Ashtanga, we have 9 vinyasa. Vinyasa means moving, breathing system. So it describes the system as a whole. And then it also describes each unit of that moving, breathing system, right? So one inhalation and one movement is a vinyasa. One exhalation, one movement is a vinyasa. So we have 9. We usually count it in Sanskrit, ekam, dve, trini. That means first, second, third. So you don't have to memorize all of that, but it is a good thing if you are an Ashtanga practitioner to learn it at some point, because it helps to define the breaths and the movements. Each vinyasa has 3 pieces of information in it, 3 areas of focus. We call it tristana. And the first is the breath, puraka or rachaka, inhalation or exhalation. And each vinyasa will tell you which to do. And then we have a condition of the body. So it'll be, a direction to move into, or a position to hold, something like that. And then we have the drishti, the gazing place. So for each of the 9 vinyasas of Surya Namaskar A, we'll have a breath, an instruction, for your body, and a place to look. Okay? All right. So the first thing we're going to go over is that. And we're also going to talk about cueing. So when you're cueing somebody on how to do it, it's good to create a kind of like a formula for your delivery. So I follow my teacher. I say, ekam, the first vinyasa, ekam, inhale, and then the cue, lift your arms up. And for the sake of this workshop right now, we can also include the drishti. Gaze to your thumbs, angushtakrai drishti. Okay? And then I would carry that pattern forward. Due, exhale, fold hands to the floor, gaze on the nose. Okay? So to be able to do these cues properly, you don't necessarily need to know the Sanskrit number, but you do need to know what the correct breath is, what the movement is, and then if you're using drishti, what the drishti is. Okay, so let's go over them, and we'll get Jelena to go through it, and I'll talk through it slowly in case you wanted to take any notes or anything. I should also mention that if you have questions, you can put them into the chat at the bottom, and Kat, our moderator there, and beside us on our screen, is watching, and she'll take note, and then whatever questions seem to be coming up the most, she'll ask us at the end. All right. So I'm gonna switch our camera. Oh, Jelena did. Thanks, Jelena. Okay, so standing first in samastiti. Samastiti means same standing, and it doesn't have a vinyasa, but it count, but it does have drishti and structure. Okay, so the structure is feet together, arms by your side, palms against your thighs, chest up, chin down slightly, and the drishti is nasagarai, towards the nose. Yekam, on the inhale, she's going to lift the arms up, her palms are together, even though you can't see it, and the gaze is towards the thumbs, angushtakrai. It means the tip of the thumb. So that's an inhale, arms up, palms together, and the gaze is on the thumbs. Due, second vinyasa, exhale, fold down, hands on the floor, shoulder width apart, nose towards your knees or shins, and your drishti is towards your nose. So due, exhale, fold, hands to the floor, drishti is the nose. Krini, inhale, slowly you lift your chest, lift your chin, and your gaze is on your nose. So Trini, inhale, head up, gaze on the nose. Chatwari, exhale, step back or jump back into Chaturanga Dandasana, and gaze is on the nose. Chaturanga Dandasana, four-limb staff pose. Pancha, inhale into upward facing dog. So inhale as you pull through, upward facing dog, Urdhva Mukha Svanasana. Drishti is the nose, Nasagraya Drishti. Shat, sixth vinyasa, exhale, come back into Adho Mukha Svanasana, downward facing dog. And the drishti is towards the navel, the belly button, Nabu Drishti. So here, the vinyasa says that we take 5 breaths. So we hold pancha, the 5th vinyasa, and we take 5 breaths, inhale, exhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then on the inhale, shat, we step or hop feet to the hands. Keep inhaling as you lift your head up, gaze on your nose. Ashtau, exhale, or ashtau, exhale, fold, gaze down. And then nava, inhale, come all the way up, gaze on the thumbs again, and exhale back to samasthiti. Sorry, I mixed up the count there. It was shat, inhale forward, 6th vinyasa, sapta, exhale, fold. Sorry, sapta, inhale. Sapta, inhale, step forward, feet to the hands. Ashtau, exhale, fold, head down. Nava, inhale, all the way up. And then exhale, samasthiti. Oh my God, I repeat it every day of my life and I still get it mixed up. Okay, so you can see you kind of reverse out of it the same way. And you see there, I was doing that technique of saying the count, the breath, the cue, and the drishti. So yekam, inhale your arms up, palms together, gaze on the thumbs. Dwe, exhale, fold hands. Okay. So these are all very, these are all particular cues that are part of the Ashtanga teaching. They're part of the conditions of each of the postures. So you could have whatever conditions you have according to your tradition. But it does help to know exactly what they should be, right? You got to know what you're teaching. So it makes a big difference in your delivery. The more exact, the more specific you can be. For example, we have something like Trini, when we lift our head and we gaze towards the nose. The cue is Trini, inhale your head up. So you're not supposed to come up onto your fingertips or lift the hands off the floor, anything like that here. My teacher says, Trini, inhale, head up only sometimes. Okay, and then exhale. You know how sometimes people come onto their fingers or do all sorts of different things? It doesn't matter. It's not such a big deal. It's not like you'll blow up or anything if you lift your hands, but it's not part of the vinyasa as it's at the structure of it. And then you could even kind of reason why that might be. You know, once your hands come down on dwe, they stay in the same spot as you go back. Trini, Chatwari, upward dog and downward dog. So you're setting the pressure of the hands as soon as they touch the floor, and then it doesn't lift again until you come all the way back up. So all of this is to say that the devil is in the details, right? You really need to understand what it is that you're teaching, and you need to have a good reference. So for us, it's easy. We have our teacher in Mysore, and then also we have some books that he has written or his grandfather has written that have all of these details in it. Yeah. Okay. All right. And then for each of these movements, right, for yekam or dwe or chaturanga dandasana, chatwari or upward dog, each of these have conditions specific to them, right? So they'll have the cues that were given by tradition, teaching, but then inside of that, we also have other things like alignment stuff. And this is much more subjective, you know, this is more about your opinion. It's not really taught unless it's part of the teaching, but usually we don't teach, we don't get taught, you know, relax your bum or squeeze your bum in upward facing dog or things like that. We have to kind of figure that out ourselves. So that's where you'll get teachers teaching very different things sometimes about the same posture, right? Different ways to do the same thing. And of course there are. So how do you know what's the right thing to teach? Well, you have to have your own practice to teach the sun salutations properly, or teach any asana properly. You have to feel it in your own body to understand it. And then if you teach for a long time, you can start to see it in your students' bodies too, what doesn't work and what does work.
And then I just want to emphasize one thing. So the way we would teach sun salutation to a complete beginner, someone that has never done a single class and, you know, has for the first time walked in, we would teach it exactly the same way. And of course, because of the style that we practice and because of the Mysore style, which is the self-practice, meaning everyone's practicing at the room at the same time, but everyone's moving at their own pace and has their practice memorized, we would stand next to the new person and call it out exactly as David has just done. And we just watch what their body's capable of doing, emphasizing certain things. So when the arms lift up, the palms come together. When the hands go towards the floor, we'll encourage them to bend the knees if that's necessary to bring the palms as close to the floor. Stepping back or jumping back is always given as an option. Lowering down to chaturanga, if you see they're having a hard time, we would say lower the knees down to the floor or just do a full-on belly flop. But the cueing is very simple and it's the same thing. It says the breath, even though they might take extra breaths, we always say the breath because we want them from the start to know what they are eventually gonna get to and what they're reaching for. But we encourage breathing. So if they have to take extra breaths, we always say, keep taking extra breaths, don't hold the breath ever. And so that becomes a way of passing on the tradition, the parampara, but also keeping it nice and simple and clean because you don't want to overwhelm someone with cueing too much.
Yeah, you know, you can get quite fancy with those instructions. So it's good to keep it clear. And I mean, it's not really about imagination, right? It's not, you don't have to imagine feelings or imagine something happening in your body. It's about tuning into what actually is.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So let's see. I'm just curious about what some of your questions are in terms of going forward. What's coming up, Kat?
Okay, so we can go through a couple of the first ones. People are asking, do you continue to breathe through each movement? And then also, is it necessary to hold the bandhas during sun salutations? So those two kind of came up a couple of times, and then I have more, but let's start with those.
Okay, do you want to do, I'll do bandhas.
Yeah, so breathing, moving system, it means movement and breath are in relationship, happening together. And so one of the ways that we can keep bringing our awareness back to our breath is by letting the breath inform the movement. And that's different than just moving and breathing together. You're always moving and breathing. But when we're doing vinyasa, we want to very intentionally try to make each of the movements fit into the duration of the breath. So if I'm inhaling for 4 seconds, I want to make that movement also fit into 4 seconds. So that means that according to the movement that you're doing, you'll either have to slow it down or speed it up each time to make it fit into that same unit, right? Why do we want the movement to fit into the breath and not the breath to fit into the movement? Well, if we were fitting the breath into the movement, then we would be changing the rate of the breath all the time, right? Because we have longer movements and shorter movements. So why don't we want to do that? Why do we want to keep a steady breath? Because it's all about focus and maintaining equanimity. And so by keeping the breath nice and calm, we can also keep our mind calm and our focus steady. So here's an example of making the movement not match the breath. Okay, so here is Jelena just inhaling as she lifts the arms. So she's inhaling, arms up, palms together. And so come back down for a sec. So even if she was inhaling for 4 seconds, so she could be inhaling 2, 3, 4, she still took a full breath. But can you see that the movement happened at the same time as the breath, but it didn't really match the breath, right? Whereas now, if we say, okay, let's make this movement last, and we'll also try to pace it over the duration of the breath. We'll go inhale, 2, 3, 4. So Jelena doesn't reach the full expression or the end of that vinyasa until the end of the breath. They happen at the same time. And she makes the movement even by kind of dividing it up evenly too. So watch, when she goes inhale, 2, see where she is at 2? She's halfway up, 3, and then 4. And then carrying that forward, exhale, 2, 3, 4. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. So do you see how slow she moved on that inhalation in order to make the movement match the breath? So that means that you keep changing the rate of your movement. And it's not an advanced technique in the sense of you don't have to be able to put your legs behind your head or anything to do that, but it is difficult. It requires your constant attention and focus, which is the point.
And then the bandha question. Well, okay, so first of all, if someone's a beginner, don't even talk about bandhas. They barely know what they're doing. There's so much happening. They're overwhelmed. And then you trying to talk about bandhas and this lock and lift, and you just drop it. You just give a simple cue. If you need to, pull the lower belly in. That's it. But bandhas, right now, you sitting here with us, unless you happen to be sitting on the toilet, no judgment, you are holding your bandhas. We are always holding our pelvic floor. When we are potty training kids, this is what you're potty training them. You're teaching them how to hold the muscles in the pelvic floor, and this is the bandha. So when we do our practice, we just increase the intensity at which these muscles are engaged. And then the harder the movement or the asana itself, we hold a little bit more. So things like jumping and floating might require a little bit more of that engagement, which is quite simple. And if, in like just one sentence, if I could explain it, if you have a vagina, then it's your Kegel muscle. So it's lifting like you're holding your pee. And you can notice that even just sitting here with us, if you think about that lifting those muscles, you feel how that pulls in on your lower belly. And so the epicenter then of these muscles, it goes just down to here. So this is Uddiyana Bandha, right? The transverse abdominal. So it's somewhere halfway between your belly button and your pubic bone. And then it's the same sensation for those of you that have a penis, which is
yeah,
it's the same muscle.
It's just like pulling it up, squeezing, and like so, you have to go pee. It's a good way.
So that's all. Yeah. Think of that sensation. And when you're doing sun salutations, yes, you're holding them a little bit more than you would be holding them when you're walking around and sitting and doing nothing. But you are always holding your pelvic floor.
Naturally, unconsciously.
Yeah, quick tutorial.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that it's really a good point to not worry about it too much with beginners, for sure, teaching somebody new to the practice, sun salutations. We just, like Jelena was saying, keep it very simple, very straightforward cues. And then slowly, through repetition over time, you can start to fill it in and get more detailed. Even with alignment, we don't make very many adjustments or corrections at the beginning because it's easy to overwhelm a person. But we will make it, some cues if we're worried about safety, right? So, and then also, of course, we're still trying to meet the conditions, right, of the posture so that it looks like Ashtanga or it looks like a sun salutation. But one of the most common places where we have to fix people is in Chaturanga Dandasana in terms of safety. And so we might be a little bit more specific here. And the thing that usually we'll do when we're learning how to do a Chaturanga is try to find the easiest way to do it, right? Because that makes sense because it's so hard. So usually people will stick their bum up in the air and bring the elbows back behind the wrists or stay really high like this. So what we'll tell people to do is try to focus on keeping the elbows over the wrist more or less, even if they need to put their knees down on the floor at first. Okay, and then to come down as low as they can here. And then if they can't hold themselves, even just to come all the way down onto their stomach so that they're going through that full range of movement each time. And then as they press up into upward dog and you know, do that again and again, they'll slowly build the strength that'll one day help them maybe get their knees to stay off of the floor. I wouldn't really, for a beginner, I wouldn't say, you know, tuck the tailbone or anything like that too much, because even that might be too much information. But once somebody started to practice more, then I would start to talk about pushing through the hands and trying to get the front ribs to pull into the body and tuck the tailbone under so that the whole front core is engaged. You can see that, right? Strong legs. And then when someone is moving into upward facing dog, then I want them to make sure that they keep the shoulders over the wrists. So that's one of the things I always see beginners doing, is they'll push the shoulders either too far forward or too far back. You know, have you ever seen somebody doing their upward dog like this? So it's not great because they're gonna jam their back doing that with their legs fixed on the floor like that. So we want to try to make sure that when we're teaching somebody that they're comfortable as they're learning how to do this. It doesn't have to be deep. They can keep the knees on the floor if they want, but we want to get the shoulders over the wrists and make sure that there's enough distance between the feet and the hands so that there's no pain on the back. So usually those are the two places where we'll correct people the most. When they go into something like downward facing dog, in Ashtanga, I just posted a little tutorial on this yesterday. Jelena's posting one later today. In Ashtanga, then we have a distinct way of doing downward facing dog. The hands are shoulder width apart, the same distance they are in Chaturanga and upward facing dog. And then we're trying to pull the sits bones and tailbone down towards the floor. So a lot of the time you'll see people arching the back and lifting through the sits bones. Now I can't speak for other traditions. I don't know what those cues are, but in Ashtanga, we are looking to contain more. And it's almost like you puff through the sacrum, you round the lower back and you draw the sits bones down. So you're going into a slight posterior tilt. Can you see that in Jelena's hips? So watch her do anterior tilt here and then into posterior tilt here. And can you see how that also lifts through the lower belly? Uddiyana Bandha engages there. At the same time, while she's doing that posterior tilt, she's still looking for that nice long tracted spine. So she's reaching from the shoulders, scapular sliding up the back. She's really pushing into the hands, using the arms to help press the weight back towards the heels. A lot of the time when we're teaching beginners, they won't be able to get the knees on the heels on the floor. It's no big deal at all. It doesn't make any difference. So we could tell them just to keep the heels up and to press down through them. Or sometimes people's hamstrings are really, short and it's difficult for them to straighten the legs. So they might look like this with bent knees. Same posture, same difference. It's the same as well for when you're doing the transition. So coming forward or coming back, it's fine to keep the knees bent. So on Sapta, you would bring the feet towards the hands, just keep the knees bent. If they're a beginner and they need to, they might need to lift the hands off the floor as well. That's totally fine. It won't always be that way, but people can just do what they need to do at first. Eventually, we want to keep the hands flat on the floor. I would say even if the knees are bent, it would be more important to keep the hands down. Okay. So not a ton of cueing, I always picture it like drawing, something like you would do an outline first, right? A rough outline, a sketch. That's how you look at the student when you're teaching them, and you just get the rough outline there. And then as they get more familiar with the moving and the breathing, and as they feel more capable, then you can start to introduce more detail.
Yeah.
So Kat, any questions there?
So many questions.
So many questions.
I'll give you 3 breathing questions, 3 more of that, and then we'll go from there.
Okay.
First one is it usual to have a constant flowing of breath, or do you ever move while you're retaining the breath after the exhale?
Okay, we call that kumbhaka. Yeah, I'm sure whoever asked that knows. So there's no kumbhaka, there's no retention in the Ashtanga sadhana, in this practice here. It says it in Yogamala, Patali Joyce's book from 1959, that he explicitly says there's no kumbhaka. So I know I've heard it taught that way too, jumping forward, jumping back, hold the breath or whatever, but that's not the way, at least traditionally, it's taught. And that's not the way I practice ever. I have to work really hard not to hold my breath sometimes. Sometimes I want to hold it, you know, when you're working hard or when you jump. So when you listen, especially for beginners as well, and I can always tell, you know, where someone is at in terms of their, you know, mastery over it, is when they land, you know, jumping back in chaturanga, sometimes you'll hear, yeah, that explosive kind of, you know, which means usually that they were holding the breath going back. So there is a huge difference that you feel in your body when the breath is nice and smooth, when you're jumping back and jumping forward. But of course, it's super hard. So you're not supposed to hold your breath. You're trying not to, but it is difficult. It takes a long time.
That's the natural inclination. That's what our body does. Like, think about when you're picking up something heavy, right? Naturally, you're going to hold your breath to do something like that. But in the practice, we're constantly coming to the breath. David keeps switching the camera on me. We're constantly coming to the breath because breath is how we regulate our nervous system, right? And when we do this practice, we do on purpose these challenging movements and challenging poses so that we can learn how to keep the nervous system calm, how to re-regulate it, and how to lower our heart rate and our blood pressure and all of these things, then have that, you know, give us that peace of mind.
Mm-hmm. Calm breath. What's the other breath question, Kat?
The next one is when you're teaching a very beginner, it tends to be hard for them to take one breath with one movement. Is it okay to work with them where they're at, like with more breaths to get into each movement?
Yeah, I think we've mentioned this earlier. So when I'm standing next to them, I would call the count exactly as David has called it out. But if I notice that they're holding their breath, I would say, take extra breaths. So I would say, take extra breaths. So they know that it's an extra breath, but I would never cue it, because if as a teacher, you begin to cue and add these breaths in, then they're going to start to internalize that and take it as the vinyasa itself. But as teachers, the most common cue we give, whether it's someone's first time or someone's been in the room with us for 10, 15 years, is breathe, breathe. We're constantly emphasizing the breath. So we never want to hold the breath, but we also, when we're passing it down, we want to teach it correctly.
Jelena and I took a couple of free breathing, deep diving courses. What do you call it?
Deep diving.
Free diving. Yeah. Where you have to hold your breath, you know, when you go down, and you try to go as deep as you can.
We sucked.
And we were terrible at it. And we thought we'd be so good at it because of the yoga. And then we were terrible. And then we found out that you have to train anaerobically. So you're supposed to, when you're training, like doing exercise and stuff, you have to hold your breath to teach your body how to work and hold the breath. But we're so used to, when we're in trouble physically, you know, we're working hard, we breathe. And so we would get down there and we'd feel stressed from holding our breath. And then it would get worse because we'd want to breathe, you know. We've spent decades teaching ourselves to do that. And then anyways, we're terrible at freediving.
Yeah.
What's the last question, Kat?
Okay, so the next two sort of go together. So this person said, I have a hard time finding the correct pace when teaching others. Do you have any tips for finding that good pace? And then on that same note, do you change the cues every round of Sun Salutations, or do you do the same ones each time? So when you teach.
Really good questions.
Really good questions.
I like so the pacing is interesting. I mean, if you have a room full of people, you can kind of get a general measure of the breath. You can hear them breathing. Online is a lot harder. And I know from teaching, like, say, lead primary series, that there's certain places like that I want to be at a certain time in the class. So I know after 15 minutes, I should be done my Sun Salutations, all of the Surya Namaskar A and B. I know this is one I always notice, at 40 minutes, I should be at Janu Shasana A. Like those are, so I always kind of look over at the clock and make sure I'm around there. Do you know what I mean? And that's like a really kind of wide pacing, a long-term pacing. In moment to moment, I'm kind of relying on my own breath. Like, I think I'm breathing while I'm teaching, while I'm doing it. And then sometimes the breath, so we're given a vinyasa count, but sometimes we change that according to what's going on in the room, right? Like for example, the vinyasa count into Marachasana D which is a very deep twist and, half lotus and all that stuff. It's a hard posture. The correct vinyasa in Ashtanga is from downward dog, sapta, inhale, jump through, and get into the full position. But that's very difficult. So usually what we'll do is we'll say sapta, inhale, jump through, and then we'll give a bunch of cues to let the person get into it. You know this if you're a teacher, right? It doesn't make sense for you just to call out stuff that people can't do. You're going to wait until people are with you, and then you'll continue counting. So there is like a back and forth. I wouldn't just set a count in my head and then do it regardless of what I saw happening in front of me, right? You gotta teach to the people in front of you. But there is something very, like, I want to say, like, there is something very rhythmic, right? About a nice counted class. When the flow is good, there's a beat, a pulse to it. Yeah.
And then the second question is, do the cues change from sun salutation to sun salutation? So no, they wouldn't change so if you were to go to Mysore and study with our teacher, you would get the bare minimum, which is Ekam, inhale, lift the arms up, Dwe, exhale, hands on the floor, Trini, inhale, lift the head up, Chatwari, exhale. Sometimes he'll just even do the count and the breath without any cue. But what we do here, so that stays the same because you're calling out that Tristanam. Remember that David mentioned at the beginning, you're calling out the 3 places of attention. But once we get to the asana itself, meaning the pose that we hold, which in case of sun salutation is the downward facing dog, that one we hold for 5 breaths, there you have an option of throwing in few cues, right? Yeah. And so, sorry, I keep looking at the other cue. David keeps getting me. I'm like, what's wrong with him? So in that case, you can add little cues. So you can say, as you count, 1, pull in the lower belly, 2, strong legs, 3, reach through your arms. They could be any cues. And it doesn't mean that after each count, you have to give a cue. It's something that feels more natural to you. So you might give 2 cues only, and that's fine, space them out. But it's only in the asanas that we hold that we would provide cues, and that they might change side to side or sun salutation to sun salutation.
Yeah. I used to teach like my teacher, Ekam, inhale, Dwe, exhale, and just leave it at that. There's something really beautiful about that.
Rhythmic about it too.
And what's good about that is you have to be very active as a practitioner because he's calling out the breath, but not the cue. So you have to know what you're doing, right? And when your mind drifts and you do something wrong, he's just at inhale and a count, then he'll shout at you across the David. But I realized that I was doing that as well in the room. But then during the week, during self-practice, Mysore style practice, I was going around and telling people things, alignment stuff, telling everybody the same things, but individually. And I thought, well, I've got everybody in the room at the same time doing the practice. Now, I could be giving all these cues to everybody all at the same time, right? And so I started talking a lot more. Intentionally, I started giving a lot more cues during the lead practice. Maybe it's too many, I don't know. But then it like Jelena said, you have to be careful about overloading it, so I just do 1 cue per breath. So, inhale, the arms up, reach from your shoulders. Dwe, exhale, fold forward, draw the belly in. Trini, inhale, push into your hands as you lift your head up. Chatwari, exhale, jump back, chin forward, keep your chest open, something like that. And then I might change those the next time around, some other aspect of the body if I'm being mindful. And I can remember what I said last time. So Ekam, inhale, draw your tailbone down. Dwe, exhale, keep the sits bones pulling down as you fold forward. Something like that. It's kind of fun. When you start talking fast, it's like those guys selling things
at auction.
Auctioneers. Yeah. Inhale, lift the arms. Dwe, exhale, you fold forward, hands on the floor, nose to your shins. Trini, inhale, lift your head up, pull your navel in, tailbone down, push into the hands. Chatwari,
and
exhale.
the whole class is like shaking. One other thing that I like to point out, and especially if you're Ashtanga teachers, and again, I emphasize this because I know it's different in different schools and different traditions, and whatever you're teaching, honor your teachers and the lineage. But what made me really fall in love with Ashtanga was this simple cueing, which constantly brings me back to my body and to my breath. And at no point is it flowered or embellished. I'm never told what I should feel. I'm never told to flower here, or, you know what I mean. I really like the simplicity of it. So think about, how does that land for you when you are practicing and when you're being a student? And then do you do that when you're teaching? It's just an interesting thing to kind of think about it, how when you deliver something very simply, you create safe space for your student to experience whatever it is coming up. Nothing's being imposed by you. You're not telling them to feel this way, to think this way. And this is when the genuine transformation can begin to happen, when they can see everything that's coming up, hold it while still moving and breathing. So just something for you kind of
let people have their own experience.
Yes. Yeah. Anger's there, great. Breathe with the anger, move with the anger, watch it, use it as a fuel. Or there's joy, good, dwell in that, see how it feels, remember it, stay with it. But, don't let them have their practice.
Okay, we have to teach again, we're teaching, if you're interested in this, I should tell you about it. We're doing an alignment workshop. It's ongoing now, it started, but you can still sign up. We're gonna send you out a code. If you guys wanna sign up, that'll give you, because it started already, a little discount. But it's all about this stuff, but we're doing all the poses, well, not all the poses,
a lot of poses.
Key poses from primary and intermediate series. Anyway, we gotta go do that. So we're gonna wrap it up. And we'll close with a chant. Before I do that, I'll just say thank you very, very much for joining us. We're really honored to have you here with us. So
thank you guys. We're really happy.
Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvina Vaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Okay, guys, hopefully we'll see you around.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for joining.